Today, however, we have talked about our basic macro models, our aggregate supply and aggregate demand. We've talked about expectations and how they change those models. We've talked about shocks to the system and how all sorts of positive and negative shocks can affect aggregate supply and aggregate demand, how it can move price level. We've talked about short-term and long-term aggregate supply, how one is fixed, how long-term aggregate supply is fixed and can only be moved in the long run. Today, I want to talk about the Keynesian view, the traditional Keynesian view of macroeconomics, how this affects fiscal policy, monetary policy, how it was developed and how it's come to play over the last 80-odd years. We'll talk about this John Maynard Keynes view today. On the next class, we'll talk about alternative views and other views and other ideas about the macroeconomy. I'm going to grab this because I see it laying out, and dang it, you've got it open to the wrong page. There we go. Oh, I had it. Sorry. I love this quote on the first page of the chapter down here from John Maynard Keynes himself. He's writing to George Bernard Shaw, the great British playwright, the Pygmalion, other plays. Famous, two very famous, very well-known, very wealthy, aristocratic British men corresponding over letters. So a letter from Keynes to George Bernard Shaw, the great playwright, on New Year's Day, 1935, the middle of the Great Depression. A global, not just a U.S., a global Great Depression. Really at the tail end, as the Great Depression has wreaked its havoc, Keynes says, "I believe myself to be writing a book on economic theory which will largely revolutionize, not, I suppose, at once, but in the course of the next 10 years, the way the world thinks about economic problems. I'm going to revolutionize worldwide economics. I mean, not right away, but give it a couple years. And my work will have revolutionized an entire worldwide field." Keynes is not a humble man. He believes himself a man of destiny. He believes himself the only man on the planet capable of solving this depression problem. He writes a book, The General Theory of Money and Economics. The General Theory. I'm just going to lay it out. He is well known, and with good reason, as the sort of genesis of modern macroeconomics. Modern macroeconomics on a nationwide scale does generally start with the General Theory in 1936. It's written amidst the worst global downturn that people can remember. The Great Depression, starting in 1929, not really started by, but indicated with a massive stock sell-off on the New York Stock Exchange, and a Great Depression that sees, in the U.S., unemployment up to 25%, thousands and thousands of banks across the country close. We've read about the timeline of the Great Depression, where thousands of banks closed. They actually passed in 1933 a bank holiday. They say banks get a week-long holiday. Close your doors. All banks are off. By federal mandate, all the banks get closed so that more of them don't shut down, so that more of them can't cease business. They closed them by federal fiat so that more of them couldn't go bankrupt. The worst economic conditions the world has ever seen. Keynes looks at this and says something must be done, and he's the man to do it, and he's the only man to do it. He is at King's College at Cambridge, where he spends his entire life. A real gentleman academic from a very wealthy family. His father was also a well-known economist in the 18th century, Neville Keynes, if I'm not mistaken. And he writes a General Theory of Economics, which he says that the problem the problem with economic downturns and depressions is a fall in consumption. It's a fall in consumer consumption. Keynes knows, rightly so, that GDP is consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. Consumption, growth, consumption, output, either way. We can do consumer consumption. Yeah, this is why, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's overall why. And Keynes knows that this is the biggest part. He knows that this makes up 70% of this equation. This is well known to Keynes in the 30s before he writes the general theory. So what Keynes says, if this big bulk of this begins to drop, it will bring the whole system down with it. He says that we need to fix this. In order to fix this, this is the problem. What causes the drop in consumption? Keynes says that people act irrationally, that consumers get overtaken by bad expectations and negative feelings, and they're upset and they don't act rationally, they don't know what's going on, they don't have enough information. There's market failures, there's asymmetries of information, animal spirits start to take over, and people don't act in their rational self-interest as we would expect economic actors to do. And Keynes prescribes certain problems to this. He says as consumption falls, businesses will realize that we need fewer and fewer things out there. So as a result, they won't hire or they'll lay people off. And employment will fall. And as a result of all of this, people will try to discount things, and the overall price level will fall. As more and more goods are out there not being bought and consumption is falling, the prices of everything will fall. As he saw the stock crash, stock prices are a price too, and they will fall. And Keynes says that this leads us down the slope as these problems pile onto each other, and this leads us to depression. This is the Keynesian theory, which he had just watched happen twice. A recession, a depression, then the beginning of a recovery, then another recession, what they called the Roosevelt recession in the U.S. So the Keynesian idea is, if consumption is the biggest part of this, and consumption is falling, and employment is falling, and prices are falling, we need to stop this. We need to arrest the fall. We need to put a net underneath this. We have to get consumption going back up the direction we need it to. And we need to get people back to work. The more people that go back to work, when they work, you get a what at the end of the week? You get a paycheck. What do you do with your paycheck? You don't just frame it and hang it on your wall. You go cash it and spend it. Spending your paycheck is what? Consumption, which leads to more employment, which will begin to drive prices up. And Keynes says we need to stop this in its tracks and fix this. And it all starts with increasing consumption. Now, Keynes says that the animal spirits have taken over. People are not acting rationally. They're not acting as real economic actors should act. So this is no good. This is not going to work. Consumption is poisoned now. So Keynes says the only way to get this to work is to increase government spending. Keynes says that we need a fiscal stimulus. increases in government spending, a fiscal stimulus. He says that as consumption falls, government spending has to go up to make up for it. So if people are not out there buying cars and refrigerators and textbooks, the government has to jump in and start buying cars and refrigerators and textbooks. And this is exactly what Roosevelt tries in the Great Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, perhaps the president with the least ideology of anyone ever. Not a flaming liberal in any way that we would think of today. Really an experimenter, a scientific president, who looks at this and says, for God's sakes, we have to do something. We won't sit idly by. We have to get out here and act. We cannot take the free market, Hayek, Mises approach that this will correct itself. We have to act, we have to do, we have to be active in the economy. So they take the Keynesian approach and increase government spending radically. They buy, 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 buy. Spend, spend, spend. They put people back to work by literally hiring them. By putting them on the government payroll. They hire people to go and build bridges and build roads and build dams. They hire people to build new national parks. They hire the Conservation Corps, the Citizen Conservation Corps, to build dams and roads and do logging, to build new national parks, to build a giant, to dam the Colorado River and create Lake Mead, the Hoover Dam, to build the Golden Gate Bridge. They hire people to go out and work at government expense. Keynes says, during times of recession, or downturn, or depression, spend as quickly as humanly possible. To the point where a government should run budget deficits. A government should go into debt during times of recession and downturn in order to finance fiscal stimulus. How does a government go into debt? How do they spend more than they have? How do they spend more than they take in? They borrow. They sell bonds and borrow. They sell bonds and borrow money, either domestically or foreign, or they print money, or they print IOUs. Keynes says, yeah, budget deficits is bad. Spending more than you have is bad. I agree. Keynes agrees completely. Budget deficits are not great. But Keynes says, this is what's going to kill you. The recession is going to kill you faster than the budget deficit. This kills you slow. Remember, it's Butch and Sundance standing at the top of the cliff looking down at the river and the rapids. And Butch says to Sundance, I can't do this, I can't swim. Can't swim, the fall is going to kill you. Don't worry about swimming. Don't worry about the budget deficit, the depression is going to kill you. Stop the depression. Stop the drop in consumption and employment and prices. As more people get laid off, you don't have tax money coming in. You don't have income taxes. You don't have excise taxes from people buying things. Government receipts are dropping along with the recession. He says you have to have some type of money to go out and finance this government spending and hire all these people and put them back to work. So in a time of depression, borrow and run budget deficits. Keynes says it's the lesser of two evils. This is the Keynesian fiscal policy. This is the Keynesian fiscal policy. F-I-S-C-A-L. Meaning it pertains to government spending. Fiscal policy. The opposite of fiscal policy is monetary policy, which is how we control the nation's money supply and interest rates and that kind of thing. Speaking of interest rates, we know that interest is the price we pay for money. Interest rates are the price we pay for money. It's the price we pay to use someone else's money. Just like the price of gas, just like the price of televisions and cars and washing machines, money has a price, and In a recession, prices fall, prices for everything falls. That means that the price of money falls as well, which means that interest rates also fall precipitously. It's cheaper to borrow money, but who wants to borrow money at a time like this? Keynes says this won't work. Keynes discounts this. He says falling interest rates won't get it done because people won't go and borrow money. They're depressed, they're sad, they don't feel positive about the future, they have negative expectations. He says it won't work. Free market economists like von Mises and Hayek and such say, listen, if the price of these things drops far enough, people will start to borrow money and open businesses and do things again. This just has to unwind itself to the point where people are willing to start investing again. And as interest rates drop further, this investment will take off, and investment goes up, consumption will go up, and wages will go up. Keynes says it won't work, it's no good, people are irrational, they won't invest, they'll never borrow, the banks are closing, it won't work. Two opposing views. So this is the concept of Keynesian stimulus, Keynesian fiscal stimulus. And in relation to this, Keynes says all of this is going to work. We're assured all of this will work because of what he calls the Keynesian multiplier. Because of the Keynesian multiplier. Here's what the Keynesian multiplier means. Step one, the government spends $100 on a car or putting someone to work or going out and doing something. The government spends $100 on some type of fiscal activity. Let's say they hire someone. 2, I'll add that on here. Government spends $100 on wages. The next step, the wage earner here gets paid the $100 and spends 90 of it on consumption. So let's say they save 10 bucks, they put 10 bucks in their mattress, and they go out and spend 90 of it on consumption. Groceries, new shoes, work boots, clothing. They go out and spend 90 of their 100. So now the firms who sold those goods have to go out and buy more for, say, $80, and they pocket $10 of profit. So now factories have to make more stuff, clothing and work boots and shoes and things, that our worker bought with his government paycheck to replenish their inventories. So in order to do that, they hire more people to make the stuff. And when the factory hires more people, they pay them in wages, and the people that they hire take their wages and spend them on things, who then have to buy more, etc., etc. So according to Keynes, we've taken this $100, and it's not $100 that we spent. It's 100 plus 90 plus 80 plus 70. Keynes says that you take this $100 and magically multiply it. And he gives you a way to calculate this multiplier. The multiplier effect is absolutely key to Keynesian fiscal policy. It's absolutely critical.
Looks remarkably like the tax model.
What's that?
Looks remarkably like the tax model.
It does look remarkably like a tax model. This idea that the government can spend $100 on wages and get 170, $340 of value out of it is magical. Governments around the world lash onto this and run with it. You mean all I have to do is borrow $100 and I get $340 of value from it? Absolutely. Sign me up. It's off to the races. Borrow, 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 borrow. Spend, 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 spend. Why don't we count intermediate goods in GDP? Because we know this doesn't work. This has been the real linchpin. This has been the downfall of modern Keynesian thought. When we've had to go back and the neo-Keynesians, as Harvard is famous for, Harvard and MIT, the neo-Keynesians, who have been working on Keynesian theory and revising it for 80 years. This is the part that we sort of go, God dang, we really need to take another look at that. Okay, but the rest of it is sad. We still need to spend, 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 spend. But where Keynes said that this multiplier is 3 or 4 or 5 times, maybe it's like 1.2. Maybe it's a lot smaller. Maybe it's like 1.1 or 1.2. We're not, it's not sure. This is still fuzzy math.
So that doesn't work?
No.
Not only that, they'd have to yield enough tax return to justify it.
Yeah.
Which they couldn't possibly.
Well, remember, it's not taxes. What we're doing is we're borrowing this money, right?
But they could generate tax revenue to pay it back.
To pay it back. And that's the next step in this is after we're out, Keynes says, okay, now this has worked. We have stimulated the economy. We have spent and spent, and we have put all people back to work, digging holes, and then a group of people coming behind them and filling up holes. Then a group of people behind them coming and digging holes. Then a group of people coming behind them and filling the hole back in. Keynes says this is fine. It's absolutely okay. Go ahead. As long as you get the money out of circulation, it'll work. Keynes says that all of this will lead us back to growth and prosperity. And in times of growth and prosperity, governments need to run budget surpluses. So when times are good and consumption is chugging right along and unemployment is low and prices are stable and interest rates are higher, governments need to tighten their belt and save. They need to run budget surpluses. Here lies the great death knell of Keynesianism, right? Because are we ever going to find a politician who says, you're right, we should really not spend this money that'll get me elected, and we should just put it in the bank? Absolute madness. They'll give you 500 reasons you can't do that, and they're all wrong. We had a budget surplus for, 2 years of the Clinton administration? Then Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich got together and said, Katie, bar the door, and it's off to the races, and we spent all of that and a lot more, and budget deficits have been yawning back ever since. So here lies the great death knell of Keynesianism. Keynes says that in times of growth and prosperity, we should save up money and bank money and have a rainy day fund like the state of Kentucky has in our budget, like the state of Indiana has in their budget, and don't raid that rainy day fund to buy bridges and roads and schools and fill in potholes and do things for your people back home that will get you elected. Leave it in the bank. Money sitting in the bank doing nothing is like free heroin to politicians. They have never, in any culture or any system of government, been able to resist it. And this has never happened. This is the picture of Keynesian fiscal policy. More spending, more employment during a recession, and we run budget deficits. Once this has taken its effect and consumption has started to go back up, we've stopped that gap with government spending. As this consumer spending has gone down, government spending has filled it in. And once this takes hold and employment is back up and people have been paid their wages and that multiplier has worked its way through the economy over a year or two, and prices start to rise again and interest rates will come back up, then you can slowly ease down the government spending as consumers begin to spend more. But when consumers begin to spend more, you need to start ramping up the government spending to make up this difference. It's a perfectly logical conclusion. It makes an enormous amount of sense. It was outstanding when received in 1936. Everyone clearly knew that this would work. It was obvious that Keynes was a genius. That Keynes had come up with the solution for downturns now and in the future. That he was an outstanding intellectual thinker. But, well, and even then, he writes this in 1936. Now the spin up to World War II begins. And countries start arming themselves, and the U.S. sends 38 old, worthless, decrepit battleships to the UK in the Lend-Lease program in exchange for the leases on several Caribbean islands. That's how we got the U.S. Virgin Islands. Thank you, Sir Winston. Lovely territory, really absolute fantastic bargain. Then we begin the Lend-Lease program where we say, well, we're not going to arm Britain, we'll just let them borrow aircraft, fighter pilots, and planes. Are we going to get those fighters? Yeah, in the condition that we get them back after the war. What tends to happen to fighter planes in a war? You don't get them back. All right, bad things happen to them. But this was the deal, and the U.S. starts ramping up production, and all these people go to work in factories, and they start making wages, and people say, oh my God, look how right Keynes was. As soon as all this production started, employment picks up, prices go up, interest rates go back up, the economy kicks off, and we have a roaring economy due to the wartime employment. What we didn't notice was that none of this wartime employment was government spending. It was private spending, and while the U.S. was running budget deficits to run it, it was efficient, effective factory spending. So was that a real Keynesian solution? Maybe, maybe not. One way or another, this idea takes hold and commands modern economics. This idea takes hold and commands modern economics until the 1970s. And in the 1970s, something radical happens. Because Keynes says, as consumption falls, employment falls, and prices fall, and interest rates fall, and in the 1970s, we simultaneously have employment going down, so the unemployment rate is rising. In the 1970s, employment is going down, and prices are going up. And we call this stagflation, where employment is stagnant and inflation, an overall rise in price levels, are occurring at the same time. Stagflation in the late 70s. In the Keynesian model, these two things are the opposite of each other. In the Keynesian model, these two things can't happen. So this begins to call into question Keynes's theory. It says we're not entirely sure if this is always the way that this happens, but we're definitely going to keep this up. We're definitely going to keep doing this, and we have all the faith in the world in our multiplier that this is going to take off, because effectively, when the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. When this is all you have to do it. At this point, we don't give much credence to monetary policy. We don't think about the power of monetary policy. We talk about fiscal stimulus, spending, budget deficits, employment. That's the big hammer. What we don't realize is that there's another tool in the toolbox. And that's not fiscal stimulus. It's monetary stimulus. The U.S. through the Federal Reserve System, which we'll talk about in depth next Wednesday, the 14th. The U.S. through the Federal Reserve System can alter the U.S. money supply. They can take money in or out of the economy. They can control how much money is in there. As we learned in basic Macroeconomics, as the supply of something decreases, what happens to the price of it? It goes up. As the supply of something increases, what happens to the price of it? It goes down. Demand curves still work. Whether this is refrigerators or tennis shoes or pizzas or sodas, and it happens to work for dollar bills too. When we know that the price of money is interest rates. So by affecting the money supply, we know that the Federal Reserve can affect interest rates. Keynes, remember, never believed in this. Never thought that it would work. Never thought that pushing interest rates down would ever encourage people to invest enough to get us out of this problem. Now in the 1970s, we start to look at monetary stimulus much more seriously. So this is a neo-Keynesianism. This is a new approach to Keynesian economics in the 1970s. This brings the Federal Reserve into the play as well as the Congress. Because fiscal policy, spending money, is the purview of the U.S. Congress. The economic health and the money supply of the country is the purview of the Federal Reserve. So here what we do is, during a recession, we want interest rates to go in which direction? During a recession, we need interest rates to fall dramatically. Because we want more investment. We want people to hire. We want people to borrow money, go buy new cars. Stimulate this consumption. More consumption. A recession is 2 quarters of negative growth. When consumption falls, we need to stimulate that so we lower interest rates. That's a bit adverse to what's happening when employment is going down and prices are going up. Squeezing interest rates might lower prices, but it's not going to help. Or squeezing interest rates might, let me back up. Lowering interest rates are a price of money. So as they lower, we would expect the prices of everything to fall. Money, shoes, wages. Wages are a price too. Keynes said this will never work because wages don't change. Wages are sticky. Keynes invents the concept of sticky prices. Keynes says wages are too sticky, interest rates don't work. So now we have a neo-Keynesianism evolving in the 70s out of Harvard and MIT and the East Coast economics schools, which say we need to drive down interest rates and have a monetary stimulus in addition to a fiscal stimulus. In the late 70s, this problem, falling employment and rising prices, especially gas prices, ended Jimmy Carter's presidency. Jimmy Carter was elected president in 1976, had to run again for re-election in 1980. Ronald Reagan, two-term governor of California, former B-movie actor, former president of the Screen Actors Guild Union, runs against Jimmy Carter and says he has done a terrible job at handling these economic issues, elect me instead, and I'll fix it. And never really says how he's going to fix it. It's just really, really charming. Takes over and meets with Paul Volcker, V-O-L-C-K-E-R, Paul Volcker, a hulking monster of a man, by the way. 6'7", cue ball bald, gotta be 410, 420 pounds. Paul is a monster of a man. Just enormous stature. Looks great on television, just towers over everyone. Paul Volcker is Reagan's chairman of the Federal Reserve. And he goes to his chairman of the Federal Reserve and says, what do we do about these prices? What do we do about employment? What do we do about this recession? And Volcker says, this is the one we have to work on first. This will kill you. He says inflation will kill you faster. We have to get this under control, and it's going to suck. I know how to do it, he says, but you're not going to like it. Prices are rising, rising, rising. He says we have to bring prices down. Prices for interest, prices for money, prices for cars, prices for gas. We have to bring all these prices down. We have to have deflation in the economy. And the way we do that is squeeze the money supply. He says in order to do this, the money supply has to come down. We're going to squeeze the money supply. And we're going to stop this. He says you're not going to like it. We're going to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. We will restrict the money supply. We will drive interest rates through the roof, and we will make this recession worse. He intentionally made a recession worse. And a brand new president with a bachelor's degree in economics from Eureka University, which no one has heard of. No, Eureka College, I'm sorry. College. Says, let's do it. An extraordinarily bold move. An extraordinarily courageous move. Takes office as president, meets with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who tells him the solution is to make the recession worse. You just ran for president saying you were going to fix it. And he says the solution is to make it worse. We're going to squeeze. And that's exactly what they did. They squeezed the money supply. And they eventually began to drive interest rates down. And they eventually began to halt inflation. And once inflation began to halt, people saw that gas prices slowly stabilized, then started to go back down. Then other prices started to go back down. Then food prices started to go back down. And once prices start to go back down after this long of a time, what mentally happens to people? Our expectations do what? Our expectations start to improve. We have seen prices go down. And our expectations improve, and we think maybe this is going to work. and people start hiring again. They think, well, maybe things are getting better. It seems like they're getting better. Maybe I should hire a couple more people. Then they go back to work. Then they hire another couple people. Then consumption starts to pick up, and this worked. And it worked. And we had the fastest recovery out of recession the world has ever seen. It starts in 1982. The economy takes off like a shot. Technology comes in, and these new personal computers start increasing technology dramatically. These little Apple IIes and IBM PCs start showing up on desks. That provides a positive shock to the economy. This starts in 82. The economy takes off. Reagan is reelected in 84 by a landslide that's never been seen before. And a B movie actor from California gets credit for fixing the entire U.S. economy by finally focusing on the power of monetary stimulus as opposed to more spending. The man's name is Paul Volcker, V-O-L-K-E-R, an exceptional economist who effectively single-handedly brought us out of that recession in the late 70s and fixed the problem of stagflation by finally releasing himself from the confines of Keynesian views, which have been the mainstream in economics for 80 years. An exceptionally courageous move, economically speaking. Monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus, the two modern views of Keynesianism. Now we have time, we don't have time. I have no time. I would have gone ahead and talked about 2008.
So